heads up. Awesome. All right, so again, welcome to our Women in Local Leadership series. This is, again, our second year doing this program. And today we're very lucky to be joined by Judi Barrett. Jackie Collins will be moderating the session. But before we get started, I just want to recognize a few of the sponsors that really have supported our work and allowed us to do this series. Those sponsors are Mountain One Bank, Brigham Health, Partnering for Performance, and Hollywood Agency. So I just want to give a quick shout out to all of them for supporting this work. It's really important for us to have those different leaders and companies involved in our work and to support these efforts to elevate women leaders in our region. So I just want to thank you all for your support. Jackie is the principal at Partnering for Performance. So she's going to tell you just a little bit about her company, and then we'll go ahead and get started for today. So two other things I just want to recognize. Both Jackie and Renee Renee is our current chair and Jackie is a past chair of the chamber. So I want to thank you all for your leadership on that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Jackie. Jackie, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. We have a really good group. I'm really excited to meet those of you who I don't know. It's nice to see your faces, and those of you who I do know, it's nice to see your faces again. I haven't seen some of you for a while, like Jennifer, I haven't seen for a while. So a segment of Partnering for Performance is 3 Mentor Advisory, and this particular program focuses on women in business only. So that's why I'm sponsoring the leadership series, and I hope to sponsor it every single year, and I hope you guys have it every single year. I love it. It's really fascinating. And I'm really happy to be here to introduce Judi Barrett, because Judi is someone I'm getting to know as I have moved over from the chamber side to the economic development side. And Judi is a fascinating person. I've seen a couple of her presentations now. So with that, I'd like to introduce Judi Barrett. And Judi is the owner and managing director of Barrett Planning Group LLC. And she brings 33 years of experience working with communities. And I do believe that one of your focuses is on affordable housing. And so instead of going through your biography here, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. And actually, this is a two-pronged question, Judi. Tell us about yourself, but how did you get into this field?
That's a long story, and I'll try to condense it to not bore everybody. My original academic interest was in American studies, which, if you don't know anything about that, is a field that appeals to people like me who can't decide whether I prefer studying English or studying history. So American studies kind of gives us access to both. And in the outside of my career, I was a writer, and I had a lot of kids. So the idea of sort of working a normal, if there is such a thing, journalism job really didn't appeal. So I did a lot of freelance work. I freelanced for the dailies, I freelanced for the weeklies. I had a wonderful time. I was raising kids. My life was not easy, but it was fun. It was interesting. And if you were in journalism, local journalism or regional journalism in the late 70s, as I was, you couldn't help but be hearing stories locally about growth and change and communities being upset about development. Does this not sound like today? Yeah. But it was really much like that was the whole conversation. So I kind of really accidentally ended up in this world of covering a lot of features and sort of in-depth articles about change happening on the South Shore and in my own town, which is Duxbury. And so that led to this desire over time to perhaps not be the one who was writing about all these things, but perhaps being one to do them. And so I ended up on the planning board in my town, and we had a project come before us to develop a large and lovely piece of property for an assisted living residence. And there was a big uproar about it. And you know, some of the concern was valid. Again, we're hearing things in 1980 that we're hearing today about concerns about the impact on water resources. And so an effort began to try to acquire this property. And I spearheaded it. I thought we have to save this land. And in the course of trying to do that, I attended a training that a state agency and a nonprofit they were putting on around the state about how to finance the saving of open space. And it was a very interesting feature on a project that was done out in Harvard, Mass, where the town had acquired a farm and they sold off a couple of lots for these gigantic Harvard, Massachusetts homes and saved the rest of the farm. And I thought, well, that's sort of cool, except the private sector is doing fine building large, expensive homes. Why can't we do something that's more socially beneficial while we're also saving the open space? That was my trajectory into affordable housing for 35 years. And so I ended up going back to school, and I tripped into a job for the town of Plymouth as their community development director, which I still tell people to this day was the very best job I ever had. I loved it. And that just sort of catapulted me into working for the state and eventually going into the private sector, working almost exclusively with cities and towns on issues around housing, planning, went back to school again. And so I've been doing this now for 6 years. And my specialization is in local government services. It's what I know. It's really what I learned. And we work on comprehensive plans, master plans for communities. I do a lot of zoning work. I actually love to write zoning. There's nothing more magical about writing some new zoning for a community and going back a couple of years later and seeing something that was built that, but for that zoning you wrote, never would have been built. And it is just this amazing feeling. It's sort of like the side of me that wishes I were an architect, but I'm too old. So anyway, that was sort of like that's a mini story of how I got to where into the field that I am, and I really love it and I care about it, and I've learned a lot along the way about concerns that are legitimate in terms of managing change at the local level, and concerns that really we need to confront as a matter of basic social fairness.
So the term inclusionary zoning, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the concept is that when new residential or mixed use development occurs, that some of the dwelling units in those developments will be priced affordably. If I told you that today the affordable housing price in the Boston area is about $350,000, you'd probably stop, because I go back to the day when it was much, much less. But we've seen tremendous income growth in the Boston area, which is why the housing prices are as they are. It is what it is. So the idea is that private developers share some of the responsibility for creating affordable units. Massachusetts history with inclusionary zoning has not been terribly successful. I think in the cities or in communities that sort of get it, that if you want the private sector to help in this regard, you have to give a financial incentive to do so. I think not all communities are equally comfortable with that idea. So we have towns with inclusionary zoning that has never produced a single dwelling unit that's affordable. And we have communities that have done extremely well. It's really understanding the economics of real estate. But I think towns have to get over their resentment of developers making money. It's kind of silly, but it's true.
So on the South Shore, what towns come to mind immediately when you think about the term inclusionary zoning? Because when we talk about economic development and all the great projects that have happened and are coming down the pike on the South Shore, this is one of the topics that I hear all the time, the affordable housing piece. And that fits into the inclusionary zoning, right? So I'm trying to figure out on the South Shore, where does that exist?
I don't think we have any good examples on the South Shore of communities that have had success with inclusionary zoning as a matter of broad public land use policy. We do have some communities that have taken advantage of an inclusionary zoning option that is available from the Commonwealth, known as a Chapter 40R district. Chapter 40R is an option that communities can adopt to designate areas for mixed income, higher density development. And in exchange, there's a financial incentive from the Commonwealth to adopt that zoning. And so Plymouth has an example at Cornish Park of a Chapter 40R district that was passed quite successfully at town meeting. It took a while for that project to move forward. The market wasn't quite there. The problem was that the market rents weren't high enough to subsidize the affordable rents. They just couldn't make that gap, if you will, big enough. That project finally moved forward, and it's pretty exciting to see. That's one that comes to mind in particular. We've had some communities that adopted kind of special district zoning. So, a community that wanted to encourage some mixed use or mixed income development in a particular location might create a special zoning district to allow it there. But as a matter of townwide policy, it hasn't, inclusionary zoning really doesn't exist here.
Interesting. Well, thank you. That was definitely off script. But it's a topic I'm really interested in. And I know that you're one of the experts in this. So I was really curious, and I thought maybe everybody else would want to hear too, where that fits in for us. So going back to Judi Barrett, so you worked for municipalities for over 30 years, and you've been on your own in your own business for 3 or 4 years. So what was the driver after all of those years to then switch and pivot into your own business?
Oh, that's a good story. So I entered private sector consulting in 1996. Prior to that, I'd been working for the state. Before that, I had worked for the town of Plymouth. And I wasn't happy in state government for a whole lot of reasons. Local government is my thing. So it's not a criticism of the Commonwealth. It was just, I don't know. I wanted to work with municipalities more. But the problem was that when I started out at state government, I had a job as a program representative in a very large grant program. And so I was working with cities and towns on behalf of the state in that job. 6 months later, I found myself being the director of the program. And so all of a sudden, now to leave state government, I had a real significant conflict of interest problem because I had touched 80 or 90 communities in the Commonwealth directing that program. So trying to leave state government became much more complicated than I ever anticipated. I therefore went to work for a firm that does a lot of work in Connecticut as well. And so for a year, I basically went to Connecticut 3 days a week and then was in Boston, and it was fine. I got over the sort of conflict period, and I worked for them for a long time. They were a business that specializes in community development services. So it was very much what I had done for Plymouth, but now I was doing it as a consultant serving small towns. I did that for 17 years. And when I got there, I said, I want to build a bridge between planning and community development. For those of you who are not in this field, you should know that there's this wall and it's bizarre, but planners do this and community development people do this. And even though they're allied disciplines, they don't always communicate well. And I had worked in places where we had really distressed neighborhoods where some good planning would have made a big difference. So community development resources alone weren't going to solve the problem. So I built up this planning arm that didn't exist when I got there. And I had a wonderful time. It was great. We hired a couple of planners. It was fun. And then another company that I had done some subcontract work for lost a critical person. And they were trying to build up their presence in the Massachusetts market. Some of their principals were aging. They were looking to kind of get in more in Massachusetts. So they offered me a job and I took it. I thought after 17 years in one company, it was a very risky thing to do. And I loved it. It was fun. But now I basically had spent, by the time I left there, 24 years working for guys. So if any men are on this call, please forgive. So I was having a wonderful time for them as well. I actually have a lot of loyalty to both of those firms. But in transitioning that other firm into the Massachusetts market, my husband was out skiing one day and had a terrible accident and ended up with a head injury. So I said, I'm not going to be commuting to Boston anymore to help this firm settle themselves. They're all set. They've got new staff. I'm fine, and I'm leaving. So I spent about a year on a consulting basis to a nonprofit in Plymouth that focuses on economic development, and they're a really great group. But what happened is that when I left that second private sector job, I just knew a lot of people. I knew a lot of people in Massachusetts planning, and people found out that I had left and I was down here on the South Shore. And I got calls from people saying, do you want to do a little subcontract work? Do you want to do a little subcontract work? It was like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And also Plymouth. And then eventually a community offered me something. It was a pretty large contract. And I thought, I got to just decide what I want to do here. So I stepped back from Plymouth. I took over my son's bedroom. Whoever's on this call with the map in the background, I get it completely. And I thought, I'm getting older, right? People are asking me, when are you going to retire? So I moved into the kids' room and I had a computer and I'm working away on little subcontract projects, and then more work kept coming. I thought, well, this is bizarre. So 6 months after moving into my son's bedroom, I moved into an office, like in a real office. And that was fine, except the work kept coming in and I had to hire people, and the office I was in was too small and there was no separate space for people. So I rented a bigger office and hired 2 staff. And today there are 6 of them here. There's about to be 7.
Wow.
I mean, it's just you know what it is? I've been so lucky. I've been so unbelievably fortunate. I have worked with some of the best towns you can imagine in New England. I've had opportunities to do projects that were pretty controversial. And I learned a long time ago that if you have principles, you stand by them, and they don't appeal to everybody. And that means maybe you don't work for everybody who might be an opportunity for you as a consultant. But you stand by what you believe. And that's what I do. So today I get paid to be both a planner who's really got to maintain a sense of like what's in the client's best interest, which is of course always what we're supposed to do. And at the same time, make sure that we don't, as a firm, sort of step back from the principles we care about in picking and choosing the projects we're going to take on. So yes, I care deeply about affordable housing. Really what my passion is fair housing. And it's kind of my mission. It's not the only thing I do, but it's very much part of who I am.
Yeah, and it's centered in your values.
Yes.
Your personal guiding, there's business guiding principles and there's personal values and guiding principles.
Yep.
And sounds like that's what drives you. And I can relate to that, and kudos to you for that. So, Simon Sinek, I don't know if everyone's familiar with him, but, he talks about leadership in terms of purpose and why. So Judi, would you say your purpose and your why is the affordable housing? Sounds like that to me.
Well, I think as a planner, that's sort of how it's manifested itself, because I think that if people can't choose to live in a community, they really don't have a voice in that community, and their choices are narrowed. And I think it's really, we can't be advocating for a sustainable world and deny basic fairness to people. It just doesn't work. So affordable housing is sort of the avenue that I think I've focused on as a planner.
Mm-hmm.
But what drives me is basic social fairness.
And you said you didn't have a story. For everybody on this call, prior to everybody coming in, Judi had said, I don't know if I have a story. And she has a lot of great stories. So Judy, what are the challenges that you face as a business owner that you may not have faced when you worked for another company or a municipality? What are some of the challenges?
Oh, man.
Yeah,
So,
tell us. Come on.
so
We
the
want to
first
hear.
thing I did when I decided I was going to hire people, I said, I am not going to do the things that men, pardon me, the guys did when I was working for them. And so one of the things that happens in very small consulting practices, I learned the hard way, is that employees tend to be paid once a month at the end of the month, or some period is paid once a month. And you don't know how hard that is for a young person coming out of school who takes a job because they need a job, they're entering a field. I said, I will never do that. I am not going to be that planner, that employer. So, I was blessed early on to find a great accountant who's just sort of helped me, takes care of payroll. I can't do that stuff. Those of you who can, I respect you. It's not me. QuickBooks is my enemy as much as my friend. But there were just these things that I said, I've just tried to think about the things that made it hard for me as an employee, as a woman employee. I remember when I took the leap and said, all right, I can't be sort of giving people extra money to buy health insurance on the Health Connector. I have to provide health insurance. Both of the companies that I worked for made it almost impossible to get decent health insurance because it is expensive. But when I finally made that leap, frankly, I was shocked at how it wasn't as expensive as I thought it was going to be. I was shocked. I said, oh my God, this is another myth. Like, yeah, it costs money, it's expensive, but you have to do this. If you think you're going to keep young people or any people working for you, you have to think about what's fair to that employee. You're asking them to give up or to give time to your company, to put your company in the best possible light, to help you build business in a way that in the end is going to make you profitable. You have to be fair to people. So again, it's this social fairness thing. I said, I'm not going to put employees in a position where they're trying to run around and figure out how they're getting health insurance. That's wrong. And my accountant said, well, you don't really have to provide it because you're a really small business, but what's right? What's right? I was a young mom once and struggled to have health insurance. It was not easy. I'm not doing that to somebody else. So I've had to learn all these things, like rethinking what were challenges for me as a worker. And I'll tell you another one too. I was very fortunate that I worked for a firm for 17 years that let me run with setting up an arm of that company that did not exist. I mean, I look back at it and think, my God, they took a risk. In a way, they took a risk. And yet they really didn't, because if they didn't want to do it, they could just spin me off tomorrow. So whatever. But you have to get this understanding as an employer that exactly the way you want something done, you set standards, you set expectations, you help people grow. But sometimes you have to let a young worker make a little bit of a mistake that doesn't necessarily put your firm at risk. But how do people learn if they can't take a little stumble? How do they learn if you don't give them the opportunity to put together their very first public presentation and get up in front of a room full of people and go blank for a minute? And then find their composure. How do you step back as the employer and say, let her stay with this moment because she's going to get through it. And of course she does. So it's this, yes, I would always like my company to have this sort of perfect image and nothing ever goes wrong, but it's not human, right? You have to let young people make a few mistakes and learn from them so they don't make them again. But you can't constantly stop them because, oh my God, somebody might not like what they're going to do or that they're going to say, or or maybe their PowerPoint chart isn't as pretty as mine would be. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It just,
Yes,
you have to
absolutely.
let people grow. So that was another thing I had to learn. I had to swallow hard and say, I'm going to let her do this. I'm just using this as an example.
Yeah.
I'm going to let her do this PowerPoint presentation the way she wants to do it. I would do it differently, but she's got to grow. And you know what? She did a great job.
So how does what you're talking about, how does that translate into leadership skills? Then what would you say your leadership skills are that allow you to feel comfortable doing that, even though you may not always be comfortable, but you do allow people to do this, which I'm sure builds a higher commitment level in them to you.
I hope so.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. So how would you, what type of leadership skills would you say you have that allow this to happen?
I think that I've tried to set the example of what we are committed to as a firm. So we are committed to leadership in social fairness, in racial justice. These are things that matter to us. We don't cross those lines. I think that, I don't know, it's a hard question to answer. I don't think of myself as a leader. So I just don't. But I think that maybe just having a firm set of a few key principles that you hold dear and you live them and you breathe them and you love them. And those are things you just don't cross. But then you have to also have a lot of flexibility too around other things that,
So
not being afraid to speak, not being afraid to speak.
Right. That's right. So you did answer the question very well, you know. You may not realize it, but you really did. You answered it really well. So I have one more question for you before we open this up. So you recently moved from Plymouth to the Hingham Shipyard. Tell us why.
So the field I'm in, the younger folks in the field who are going to college and grad school in the Boston area, they don't want to leave it. They don't want to leave Boston and they don't want to leave Cambridge. And I don't blame them. I just love it up there. But getting them to come to work on the South Shore can be a challenge. And so for a while, really being in Plymouth for a while was fine. I just happened to be fortunate enough to have a young employee. She was the first person I hired, who had just finished grad school at the urban planning program at BU. And she happened to live on the South Shore. So this was like God watching over me, honest to God. And she really didn't mind the commute, but I swear this poor young woman just never she had to complain in her car when she was driving to work, but she never complained to me. The fact is I needed to hire more people. It's how I got to 6. I had to hire more people, and I couldn't recruit that far on the South Shore. I was not getting applications from people who were really qualified to do what I needed done. I couldn't break into the Boston labor market of young planners where I was. So I had just recently finished working on Hingham's master plan update. I happen to love this town, by the way. For any of you who live in Hingham, you're so fortunate. And I was familiar with the shipyard. I also was familiar with this particular building I'm in because years ago, a large environmental firm was here and I did some work for them as a subcontractor. So there happened to be some space open and I came and looked at it. And I saw the shipyard across the street and I said, God, I love it here. But of course the rent's more, right? So I had to get through that. Like, oh my God, I'm going to fail again. I'm going to take on rent I can't afford. But I had to hire somebody. As soon as I re-advertised and said we were at the Hingham Shipyard, it changed everything.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, changed everything because I was able to say, you know, we have the ferries across the street, plus 220 stops outside. I hired a young man shortly after we finished here. He just finished the planning program at UMass Boston. And I'm about to offer a job to a young woman who finished up at MIT a couple of years ago in the graduate program. And it just happened she lives in Weymouth, but it just, having access to public transportation is key. And I would say as a planner, I don't want to be encouraging people to be making single occupancy commute trips all over the place just to work. So it's really been a blessing to be here. It was a hard transition in a lot of ways for all of us. You know, moving is never fun, I guess. But I'm so glad we're here, and I'm just, it's a wonderful environment to be in too. Because I've worked on the master plan here. I kind of know I'm in this area where, because of the ferry, because of the transportation opportunity that opened, it had an impact on the value of real estate around here. So as anybody who knows, like, there's been a lot of development at the shipyard, but I'm also surrounded by two opportunity nodes here. You know, one is the old Talbot's property, the Talbot's property, and the other is the Stop and Shop Plaza. I'm pointing in the direction where these places are located. I can't help myself, but you know, I mean, there's going to be change here too, and it's fun to be in a place where you know change is coming. If you're a planner, you got to love the opportunity that change brings. So it's fun to be here, and I'm still close enough to home that I can kind of make sure my husband's okay. And I mean, that was the whole issue with not working in Boston anymore. It's like, you don't leave a guy who's older than you are with a head injury an hour away. You just don't do it. I mean, I can't, right? I love him. So I'm still close enough to home that I can kind of take care of things there, but then I have this life, which is a lot of fun.
So then you picture yourself staying there for the long term?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know that I would need to move. The only reason I might need to move is if I needed more space, but honestly, guys, I do not want to hire more people. I'm at this point where, you know, one more person's like this big risk. And this is a hard time. Like I was petrified a year and a half ago that we were going to fold, because all governments at all levels were worried about revenue. And so there was a period when there wasn't much new activity coming out of local government. We didn't see any requests for proposals for a couple of months. And then all of a sudden, all this activity started. And we were swamped, and we are swamped here. We are just wicked busy, and I'm expecting it to continue, at least in the short run, because we know there is a lot of money still out there kind of for municipalities to spend. And frankly, many of them don't have the capacity to move the money. If you ever hear stories about Congress appropriated, you know, billions of dollars and it hasn't gotten to the people it needs to get to, let me tell you why. Because most local governments do not have the capacity to move this money out the door. One of my dear employees here, who kind of became a self-made and very, very effective expert in federal grants, community development block grants, and home funds, was doing some planning work for those communities last year and has been called back by two of them just to help with management of those grants, because the towns don't have the ability to get the money out the door. So we know there's more work coming. And if that isn't coming, something else will. You know, I don't want to retire. People ask me that all the time. When are you going to retire? Why would I do that? Why would I do that? I went to my 50th boarding school reunion in June, and there are all these like really cool women who are talking about their grandchildren and the trips that they're taking. And I'm like, I got to get to work. I got to go to my office. It was very funny. Well, man.
I don't think there's any rule that says you have to retire by XXX. I think that's a definite individual personal choice. So
yeah, I do too.
Yeah, good for you. Wow, this has been great. You have a lot of stories, like I said, and I actually have probably 100 more questions I'd love to ask you, but that's going to have to be on our own personal time. So Courtney, I'm going to turn this back over to you, and we'll see who has some questions.
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to just open the floor up to the audience for some questions. You can raise your hand or just unmute yourself. It's very informal, or you can drop it in the chat and I can read it from there. But I see that Chris and Renee have their hands raised. So I'm going to go to Chris first and then Renee and then Jennifer.
Thanks, Judy. Very interesting. Appreciate your comments. I have sort of two questions. The legislature passed a rule that allows zoning changes to be made with a simple majority. My question is, have you seen that taken advantage of, and has it been effective? That's question one. And question two, if you were sort of could tell our legislators how to vote, what are the next 2 or 3 policies or legislative actions would you suggest to really make a dent in our housing issue in the state?
So we're not seeing much activity yet with the housing choice bill, which is what you're referring to. There are some issues with the way the legislation was written that are being sorted out by the Department of Housing and Community Development, working with some allied agencies. I think the things that are very clear in the legislation are around matters such as adopting a Chapter 40R district, what I referred to earlier about that sort of option for higher density zoning. I don't think anybody questions that that can be done on a simple majority basis. Just so you all know, if you're not familiar with this, Massachusetts has a standard that zoning can only be adopted and amended with a 2/3 vote of the local legislative body. We are the only state in the country that has that rule, but we have it, and so communities don't want to let go of it. It's been a challenge. So anyway, 40R, I don't think there's any question about, but there's a lot of murky things around. Well, what if you want to do mixed use, and how does the commercial piece affected by that? And there's been some disagreement about how to implement that law. So we're actually waiting for some additional guidance from DHCD on questions around, say, mixed use development, for example. It would have been so much cleaner if the legislature had just simply changed the vote across the board and said, simple majority vote for all zoning. And what you find in many other states is, but if someone's property is affected by a zoning change and they wish to object, then the threshold goes up because someone has said this might harm me. But the standard is a majority vote. And I hope that we get there. I'll tell you, I work with a lot of really small towns, and they do not have the ability to sort out, okay, this is simple majority, this is 2/3. I'm not sure about this. What does town council say? The town council or the town attorney, they're not sure either. So it just is kind of murky right now. I'm all for make the rules clear. And unfortunately, I think this well-intended bill is not as clear as it needs to be. So hopefully they'll fix it and we'll have zoning that comes into the 21st century.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you ask me something else? I think you did.
Well, I asked you if you could, what would be the next piece of legislation? I guess the first thing would be to clarify the first one. Is it just, I don't want to take all your time. Is there anything quick that you sort of want?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
Massachusetts is what's called a home rule state, which, and in the world of local government, means we can do whatever we want. Of course, it's really not like that, but there is this perception. As a result of that home rule kind of position, we have municipalities all over the Commonwealth that have master plans that say one thing and their zoning says something completely different. In states where the plan and the zoning have to relate, you kind of know when you go into that community what the rules are. And the rules are based in some kind of rational planning process. We don't have that in Massachusetts. And I think that it has a lot to do with why when you cross from one town line to the other, you are just in a completely different culture, a completely different land use regulatory system. And, you know, developers, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, really spend way too much time trying to figure out how to get something as simple as a site plan approved. So, you know, I get it that towns don't want to kind of give away the store, and I wouldn't want them to feel that they had to do that either, but clear rules make a huge difference. Clear rules tell a developer, I can make this work, or no, I can't. That's an improvement. I think the other thing that Massachusetts needs to come into the 21st century on is this concept of impact fees. And anybody who's a developer on this, you probably want to shoot me, but I have to say this. When I've worked in Rhode Island or I've worked in New York, for municipal clients, developers trying to do a big project, they know coming in what they are going to have to pay for mitigation. How much am I going to have to pay for each housing unit I'm going to build? I can build it into my pro forma. I know what I'm supposed to do. In Massachusetts, it's a grab. And developers don't know when they come into a community how much they're going to have to pay just to get an approval. And that's not right. So in the world of Judi stands for fairness, that's got to change.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Renee, you're up.
Yeah, quickly, I just, in relation to some pearls of wisdom from you, and you answered most of my questions, actually. Thank you, Jackie, for your good questions. But in terms of the chamber and the 2030 plan and trying to recruit businesses and young talent to live on the South Shore, I get the shipyard, it has the boat and there's some activity and so on. Is that the attraction? What else would be the attraction? What else could we do, living here on the South Shore, maybe getting involved with the towns in terms of, I just learned about all that you're talking about when I got on the chamber. So I was a bad town participant. I did not, really go to town meetings. I didn't really understand the impact that I could have potentially on everything that's happening for the economic growth and viability of the South Shore. So maybe just a few words of wisdom there, Judi.
I think that whenever the chamber has spoken up by invitation or otherwise on some, say, development project that's happening in a community, I see that as the chamber really establishing a face with local government that I got to tell you is very different from other parts of the state. I work all over New England, mostly in Massachusetts. Chambers of commerce don't do this. They are always kind of stepping back a little bit, or they're not sure what they should be saying about housing. And I just think the South Shore Chamber is special in that regard. I think that continuing to kind of be that presence we're an economic development organization. We care about the quality of jobs and the presence of jobs and access to jobs on the South Shore. That's our thing. And guess what's kind of one of the things that's in the way? It's, can people choose to live here? Right. That said, I would say, the issue with choice is really about choice. It's the town that's kind of like all one zoning district, all large lot zoning, everything's a single family home is not choice. Every town can have a town center, and it may not have 20 units an acre of multifamily housing, but they can have something. So I think it's about, if you want to get a variety of people living in your town, you got to offer a variety of living experiences. I often tell my clients, my municipal clients, think of housing as a product. And people choose products in different ways. They price them, they look for amenities, they look for setting, they look for, how much management am I going to have to do? I mean, just choice, provide choice. If you want to get younger people and keep older people, and kind of have that healthy mix. If you believe in sustainability as a planner, you got to believe in diversity. You can't escape them. So I think that's the message. And the chamber, we have a very hard job to do as a chamber, because we're carrying a message that's unusual for a chamber of commerce, but we need to keep doing it as we continue to work on the other aspects of the 2030 plan.
Thank you, Judi.
Jennifer, do you want to chime in here with your question?
Sure. First, I want to say that your enthusiasm was infectious, and who knew planning could be so exciting to listen to at 9 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for that. But I wanted to ask, I've been reading about Governor Baker and his identifying housing as an issue in Massachusetts, and what will his impact be as far as for the South Shore, him making this an agenda item and a priority? Will that help? And if so, do you know how it might help?
I think it can help. I think that legislation like housing choice would probably be a little more effective if it had more teeth in it. Again, we have this somewhat unusual kind of relationship between state and local government in Massachusetts, in that the state kind of is leading almost, I think, by principle and by persuasion. And municipalities have a lot of latitude. And I'm not in my lifetime going to change that. And I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. But I do think the state has a tough job being persuasive. So how do you do that? Well, one of the things that's made Chapter 40R attractive is the state puts money into it. And so, but I mean, as a planner, I kind of ask my question. So is it the only way to get towns to do something is to give them money? Well, then I look back at 35 years ago in my field when I was writing $1 million grants and it made a difference. I'm thinking maybe that is kind of what we have to do, but the state doesn't have unlimited resources either. I think that tools that could be more directive than persuasive may be necessary. I also think that more resources are going to have to be put into, whether we like it or not, infrastructure development on the South Shore, because it is an issue of just being able to get around. Mobility on the South Shore is not easy. It's why I moved. I needed a place where mobility made a difference. It is not really feasible to do arrangements of density, arrangements of housing choice in a community that has no water or no sewer. And towns make choices to not have utilities. Some of it's financial, some of it is, if we don't have those things, then we won't get certain kinds of development. I mean, those conversations are real and they happen, and I've heard them for 38 years. So I think the state, if you really want to make change happen, you gotta do more than try to be persuasive. And Chapter 40B has been a helpful tool, but I think this is where I think the real choice point's coming. We have a lot of communities that are over that 10% minimum. It's increasing number of towns. It's basically the towns that have water and sewer. What are we going to do when most of those communities where developers could build are now over that 10% and they don't have to do anything with Chapter 40B? Now, what are you left with? Communities that don't necessarily have any resources. I think this is going to be a huge challenge. That probably doesn't answer your question, but I think state government needs to have the guts to be a little more directive.
Awesome. Thank you, Judi. Does anyone else have any more questions for Judi? I know we're like a little bit, but just one more opportunity. Okay. Well, Judi, thank you so much for joining us. I've enjoyed today's session, getting to know you a little bit better. And Jackie, thank you for moderating. You're always so good at asking the questions and guiding the conversation. So I thank you for that as well. Another quick shout out to our sponsors, Partnering for Performance, Mountain One Bank, Hollywood Agency, and Brigham Health. Couldn't do this work without you. So I appreciate that. And last little plug I'm going to do before I let you go for the day out into this crazy storm happening is we are accepting nominations for the 2022 Will Speaker Series. Heather did drop the link into the chat box. You can go right on our website and nominate either yourself or someone that you know that is a leader here locally on the South Shore that you would like to hear more from or get to know better. And we hope you will take the opportunity to do that. And thank you all again for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your week. And yeah.
Thank you, Judi. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Jackie. Bye.